Hey, everybody. Now we're going to talk about what is evaluative writing. We're going to go through this nice little lesson here. So, what is evaluative writing? Let's find out. No, I do not want to start at my last page. So, evaluative writing, as the name implies, you are evaluating things in evaluative writing. For a less circular definition, you're determining the value of or quality of a subject, such as evaluation reaches a subjective conclusion and is type of a basic argument. Evaluative writing covers various types of writing, but the one most people are most familiar with is the review. So that will kind of be our touchstone for the moment. When it comes to when it comes to write the actual essay associated with this concept this semester, you'll be evaluating yourself as a student in this class and showing how you did an effective job learning what you needed to. We'll talk more about that later, though. For now, let's just talk about about evaluations in general. Let's light this candle. So, what is an evaluation? My definition of an evaluation is a subjective opinion supported by objective evidence. Pretty awesome, right? I know. Anyway, let's unpack that a little bit more. Opinions are inherently subjective, and there are some, and some are simply matters of taste, such as if you like chocolate or not, who your favorite band is, etc. There's no point in arguing these, as there's often no quantifiable reason we prefer these things. We just do. That said, many people proceed as if all opinions are somehow sacrosanct and valid simply because of their existence. You know, the whole everyone's entitled to their opinion viewpoint. While it is true that everyone is legally entitled to their own opinions in this country, that doesn't make them all equally valid. Setting aside the matters of taste, you're only really entitled to the opinions that you can validly support. That's where evaluative arguments come in. Without support, an evaluation would simply be a single sentence stating your opinion, which wouldn't be terribly compelling. By providing support, you validate your opinions by showing your readers that even if they disagree with your overall judgment, you have arrived at a conclusion based on valid evidence and reason. So you need to support your backing. So there's three things that kind of go into an argument. You have a claim, which is kind of what your opinion would be. You have data, which is the evidence that would back it up. And there's this thing called a warrant that kind of connects all three of them. Let's talk about criteria, though, because this is evaluation. So you need to have criteria to kind of base your evaluation on. Every evaluation has to have criteria. These are standards by which you're judging the subject. Depending on your subject, there may be some of these that are expected to be present by your readers, while others will be up to your own discretion. For instance, if you're reviewing some movie, some people would probably expect that the quality of the actor's performance would be the criterion in your evaluation. If it's missing, your audience is likely to question if you know enough about movies to review them. Other criteria, however, may be things that people would not see as important. For instance, if you're reviewing the same movie as above, depending on how much you know about filmmaking, you might care about lighting or how the scenes are shot. Other people might not care about that. In the end, there is likely to be a mix of both types of criteria. There will be key elements that are pretty much universally important or to whatever category of thing you're evaluating: books, movies, video games, albums, restaurants, etc. But there will be other things that are important to you that you want to include as well. When you are writing your evaluation of your own performance in this class, you'll probably want to look at the same areas that your essays were evaluated based on. As well as other things like course objectives on the syllabus, when forming your criteria. Now, relative weight refers to the fact that not all criteria are equally important to your opinion of it. Think about how sometimes you have where your tests are more heavily weighted than your homework. In other words, 1 point test is worth more than 1 point on the homework. If you do more homework and do well on the test, you'll still get a passing grade. Of course, that would raise the question about how you could do so well on the test if you didn't do well on the homework, but I digress. The point is that not all criteria is evenly weighted. For example, if I reviewed food, I'd probably rank the criteria in this order, the most to least important: taste, smell, and texture. Some people would put them in a different order simply because they personally care more about one of those things than I do. They would just rank it higher and would have a more impact on their evaluation. Someone else might include additional criteria such as nutrition values because that might be very important to them. As another example I've discussed way back at the beginning of the semester, when I evaluate your essays, all the criteria aren't equally important. For instance, development are far, far more important than mechanical and grammatical correctness. You may have an essay that uses English perfectly from a technical perspective, and still fail the essay because the content of the essay. To make a short story short, if you want your review if you go into your review knowing not only your criteria but also the weight of their weight is relative to each other in terms of making your overall opinion. So basically, just certain people will weigh certain criteria a little bit more importantly. Just like he had the example with the essays, whenever I recently graded, I'm currently grading some sophomore essays. I use the holistic rubric that Mr. Wade Christian uses as well. On this recent essay, was putting a little bit more emphasis on organization and development than focus, style, and correctness. And correctness usually is not necessarily the most important thing. A lot of people get too hung up on correctness, and it scares them away from actually expressing their thoughts. When actually, like focus, development, organization, those things are a lot more important in my evaluation of your ability to do an essay. If correctness at most might affect your grade by a point, where those other ones will affect it by an entire letter grade. So yeah, certain people will care about certain criteria more than others. So tips on generating criteria. When you're thinking about your criteria, here are a few tips to help you get started. Number one, place your subject in the smallest category you possibly can. If you're going to do a movie, you know what kind of genre it is. Expectations for an action likely be much different than a romantic comedy, for example. Sometimes you can get even narrower, such as if it's a part of a series that you've seen the other parts of. For instance, Star Wars and Alien are both sci-fi movies, but they're radically different. If you have one of these movies and then went and watched the other one, watch one of the sequels, you'll have a much more specific set of criteria than generic sci-fi movie criteria due to your experience with the first movie. Then consider the fundamental elements of that category. Once you know what the smallest possible category to place your subject in, consider the basic elements of that category are and which are the most important. Stick to our movie example. If you're doing an action movie, things like effects and fight scene choreography will probably be pretty important, while plot will probably be less important. Number three, consider what is important to you. Once you have the fundamental elements, consider any that might be missing that are significant to you. Obviously, the fundamentals will most likely be the most important, but additional aspects are important to you and are important to give you a well-rounded review. So let's put the fundamentals. Now, there's the four-column log. Here's an example of a four-column log. Whoever named this is No Don Draper. It's a log that's got 4 columns. What could we call it? I got an idea. Let's call it the four-column log. So basically, they kind of have 4 particular you'll work with. So you have your category, the criteria that you're judging the category on, the evidence that you would align the criteria on, and the judgment. So here's my category. Here's the criteria it has to live up to. Here's the evidence. Did it live up to it? Yes or no? Though the name isn't exciting, 4-column logs are useful in helping creating all the information that you gathered for your evidence. Here's what goes into each column category: a broad description of what the aspect of the subject you're considering to be your main. Make sure that you've covered a variety of categories in order to have a complete evaluation. Criterion: each category will have one or more criteria associated with it. These will be specific standards that you'll be using to evaluate the category. Evidence: this is the column where you will record the examples of what you have read, watch, /8, whatever you do with the subject. And then judgment: this is where you may take note of how well your subject did or didn't meet your standards. You need to come up with your own categories and criteria before you interact with your subject for evaluation, so that you know what you're looking for. It's best to fill out the evidence column as you assess the subject, so you don't have to try everything. Then your judgment will come after you have had time to compare what you wanted, your criteria, you got, your evidence. And here's just an example of one that is filled out. It's about video games. So the categories he chose were controls, visuals, multiplayer, single player, explains his criterion. He provides evidence that would support that, and then he would pass his judgment. All right. So that's kind of how he did that. You could look at this on the Moodle page or on the example I have connected to this week's assignment, or this week's what to do post. All right, so organization. Now that you've gotten all your ideas organized into a 4-column log, it's time to sit down and write your essay. But how should you organize it? As with most essays, your introduction will give some general context to help set up the discussion. It is an evaluation in general, though, that will include some indication of your levels of familiarity with the subject. If it is a movie that's a part of a series and you haven't seen the others, we need to know that. If it is a novel by your favorite author, you should tell us that. If there's a band whose album you're reviewing and you like or dislike them based on their previous albums, you need to disclose that as well. When evaluating yourself in this class, you will probably take the form of this will probably take the form of a given, a bit of an indication as to where you were when you got into this class. Did you feel like you had been adequately prepared? Was this a whole new world, etc.? This is where you get to throw me under the bus. So go to town, all that fun stuff. Then once you've set up your essay, you'll typically walk through your criteria and discuss how the subject did or did not meet those standards. There are times that you might want to make an exception and organize your essay differently, such as chronologically, but there are by far the exception. If you think that you're in one of those situations, email me. Yeah, so basically, whenever it comes to writing this particular essay, the easiest would probably be chronologically starting with your literacy narrative and working all your way towards the essay you just got done writing, your informative essay. So I would do it in those particular orders. Start off with literacy narrative, how you got better as a writer, then talk about your observation essay, how you got better as a writer, and then your informative essay, how you got better as a writer. Then once you've talked about all of your standards, evidence, and individual judgments, you'll use your conclusion to talk about your overall opinion. Make sure that your overall judgment lines up with individual judgments along the way. In other words, if you spend the whole essay talking about what was great about your subject, it wouldn't make any sense if it was only somewhat good. If you realize that your overall judgment does not line up with what you've shown us, you need to determine why and bring all those things into alignment. Basically, you just need to make sure everything walks the walk and talks the talk. All right, so that's how to do evaluative writing. That's what your portfolio essentially is. You're making an argument over whether or not you improved as a writer, you didn't improve as a writer. Your criteria, I would probably say, would be focus, organization, development, style, and correctness. Those would probably be 5 good criteria to work with. And then I would just kind of walk chronologically through all of your essays to see how you got better at it. All right, that's all I got for you. I will see you all later. Bye-bye.